I was a diving instructor out in the Caribbean, a little island called Utila off Honduras. I was running a bar in the evening with another English guy, cycling my bike around the island, going diving, teaching people to dive, and taking people out for fun dives around this island. And so there's a point where I didn't really talk too much about that experience because it seemed too much of a divergence from what should normally be a career track.
Welcome to Learning with Leaders. Today's guest is Russell Butler, CEO of iVentiv, an extremely interesting company. He will be talking about some quite insightful things, how working and being responsible for a bar on a little island really helped him to get the right perspective for his future business, and why young professionals shouldn't put too much pressure on themselves in the beginning of their career. Hello, good morning, Russell. Welcome to Learning with Leaders.
Morning, Paco. How are you?
I'm very fine, although I'm still digesting the defeat of the German team against England, but that's another topic.
We've already moved on, you see. We've beaten Ukraine 4-0 now, so we moved on quite quickly, actually.
Yeah, I'm not interested in those details anymore, Russell. Okay, thank you. So, Russell, I think we met around 4 or 5 years ago in Paris during one of your still face-to-face iVentiv conferences and or events. And it was, for me at least, it was a memorable session, not only because I met you for the first time, but also because it was a session led by Nick van Dam, at that time CLO of McKinsey. So, I mean, we're in the very heart of introducing you. You are the CEO of iVentiv, the founder as well, and you are a passionate for, not only the learning topic, but also networking with people. I mean, in early days in your career, you were also very active in the sales and marketing arena, if I remember well.
Yes, yeah. So learning, I mean, I've spent my life around learning, spent a long time in sort of university, and then came out of university, but still remained kind of linked with that world, worked for a serious games company, and understood that learning was all about experience. And from that, I decided to start, essentially a conference company in 2008 in the midst of a financial crisis. So had to sort of pivot and sort of change the model. But essentially, we have a very niche sort of setup at iVentiv in terms of how we run the events, but it's all about experience. So it's a small group, as you mentioned when you were with us in Paris, it's probably about 40 people, very senior, so senior people in large multinational organizations, so well aligned. We bring them together and really just allow them to get into conversation and have some fantastic sponsors who support that. And we've run 102 in person, so up until sort of the start of the pandemic. And then I think we've run almost 70 virtually over the past year and a half now. So in the event space, but in a very niche subsection, really focused on learning and development. So that's iVentiv.
Yeah, so it sounds very planned, very polished. But if I remember during our preparation session for this year, you mentioned a very, I would almost say, bohemian part of your life. Would you like to share a little bit more about that? And also, why could this be important for young professionals?
Yeah, so we talked a bit about my journey, and I think journeys really only make sense when you look back at them. And I think that's probably one of the key things I would learn, take away from this, is that when you're going through different stages, particularly early career, some parts of it might not seem like they really make sense, and you might be in some roles where you think, well, this isn't really right for me, this is a bit of wasted time. When I look back, none of the time has been wasted at all, because it all helps sort of build who you are and direct you where you're going. And I think the bit that probably surprises people when I chat to them about when I started iVentiv, the year sort of prior to that, I spent a few months working for a conference company immediately prior, but the year prior to that, I was a diving instructor out in the Caribbean, a little island called Utila off Honduras. I was running a bar in the evening with another English guy, a boat in a tree, essentially, the bar was. So quite a spectacular location. Then cycling my bike around the island, going diving, teaching people to dive, and taking people out for fun dives around this island. And so there's a point where I didn't really talk too much about that experience because it seemed too much of a divergence from what should normally be a career track. So I did it. And actually, I remember putting my profile on LinkedIn, and I omitted this bit. And I think actually maybe it's still omitted on my LinkedIn profile, because sometimes you go and take this time out, and people, well, or you have this perception that people look at that and think, well, it was just partying on an island, which, admittedly, I was to a large extent. But when I look back now, I learned so much from being there. I spent a lot of time at university where I learned a lot of theory, and then there's the real world you get into where you actually have to start applying that, and taking people out diving and working in a bar where, particularly the diving, you go out, you can have a murky day, and it wasn't going to be a great experience, but you could make it a great experience. You could really focus on, talking to people and making sure they enjoy the day out. And you were a big part of them enjoying that experience. And the same at the bar. It was all about sort of connecting and talking to people, introducing people to each other and different things. So it was all really important part of taking all this idea and theory that you learn, and then just living a bit of life for a while and getting to know people and dealing with lots of different customers and different perspectives. So I see now how it was a really important part of sort of getting me to where I am now. But at the same time, it felt to me like it was something that had to be sort of squirreled away from my CV and not necessarily shown. So, and I probably imagine there's probably a lot of sort of young professionals who have that same period where they maybe go for a year abroad, a year, gap year, and they're doing it just, probably at the time just because it's like, well, I can delay work for a year. That's largely why I did that idea. But actually, when you look back, it's a great way to broaden your mindset. You connect with so many different people from all over the world, and then you've got that with you. You've got that view that when you chat to people from different parts of the world, you'll be able to find things to connect with them on. So, so I think that's kind of quite an interesting reflection on sort of gap years, or these little periods that people take out in the start of their careers, I suppose.
Yeah, I fully agree. And if you were not the inventor of client experience journey, but at least you were an early adopter, with during the day, the diving instructor, and then in the evenings, the bar. So that was a whole client experience journey, I suppose.
Yeah, it was, and it, like, there's a common thread through the whole thing was that you were basically in the entertainment industry. You wanted people to enjoy the experience they were going through, and that word experience is basically linked to every role I've had, and specifically now with the business I run, it's all about making sure people have that great experience and that customer focus that I think. I mean, when Susie and I hire people here into the business, we're always looking to say, look at CV and have they had any time where they've been customer focused, where they've been literally in front of customers, like in a bar or wherever it be. But I think that experience is so important, literally dealing face to face with people. So those experiences are always good to tot up, even in over summer periods, whatever it is, where you can get experience working with people, and people in different. I mean, people are all different, but people in all different sort of stages of the day, and how they're behaving. In a bar, you get all different types of characters, and it's a good experience to learn to deal with people in those moments, I think.
Yeah, I agree. So now in these conversations, I like to ask people a lot about, what's your personal most memorable coaching experience or observation. And when we talked the last time, I remember there, a keyword, it was, active listening. When I was delivering trainings, sales trainings a few years ago, active listening was some of the probably most underrated skills, especially in sales people and key account people. So what is your anecdote around that topic?
Yeah, so when you asked me this question, I thought straight back to Richard Smith, who's unfortunately no longer with us, but he was my sales director at the time, and this was early part of my career. Pretty much may have been my first sales meeting, I suppose, going out with Richard. And he'd been, hired into the business as an experienced sales professional, and I was brand new working in sales and marketing. And so before we went out to this, I was like, okay, he's going to be really good at sales. I want to learn from him. I want to understand how does Richard do this? And I remember really distinctly, we went up to this meeting, and we stopped at a fast food restaurant, actually, because we got there early, stopped at a fast food restaurant, sat at a sort of a picnic bench outside, had a coffee, which I didn't really like coffee at that stage, early in my career. I need it now several times a day. So we stopped and had a coffee and had a chat. And I was still kind of thinking, I'm going to watch a true sales pro, and I wonder what lines he'll use. I wonder how he'll sell what we're going in there with, and was thinking it was all essentially about me. That I would think, okay, well, what do I know? What can I, how do I sell? That was what I was always focused on. And Richard was purely focused on the people we were going to meet and their organization. And before we went in, it was understanding more, doing a bit more research on them, rereading his notes, rereading his sort of conversations he'd had with them in the build-up, so he knew the personal connections and the phone calls they'd had, because it was largely phone call back then. These interactions that he'd had. So when we then went into the meeting, it surprised me because I was expecting Richard to go in and just be wowed by oh, look at him sell it. But actually we got in there and he was just really interested in, I said the customer, the prospective customer, I suppose, and really built up a rapport with them straight away, and was not trying to fit what we had in with what they had. He was just understanding whether what we had was right, for them, and understood, them as individuals and them as an organization, what they were trying to achieve and seeking to achieve. And I was in, going to meetings with Richard where he'd sort of be like, well, this isn't quite the right thing for what you're looking to do. And that was a really an eye-opener moment for me, because I always thought, you go in and you sell, you go in and push it forward. But actually, and still to this day, that's still the most valuable lesson for me is, it's not about you. You have all that background, that knowledge, that insight behind you. You need to understand your product and everything, but it's not about that. It's about going in and understanding that customer. And still, with the business I run now, the successful sponsors and people we work with, you see that in them all, that they're just interested in people and connecting and not trying to just sell. They're trying to, it's more of a consultative approach, I suppose, and be an active listener. So that was a really really interesting experience for me.
I can imagine. Yeah, and something which is also indirectly connected to what you just shared is your observation also with your current younger team members, because your team has grown in the past quite a lot. So that very often they put too much pressure on themselves. Why do you think this is not good, to put too much pressure on yourself?
It's probably similar to how I was at that stage. So I think the reality is it takes a long time to get started on your career. So when I went through school, the natural assumption was you'd pretty much go to university. So all of us were kind of going to university, didn't know what I wanted to study. So did a general business admin degree because I just thought, well, everyone's going and doing this. And then I did a master's because I was still not sure what I want to do, and everyone had the same degree as me. So I was I'll do the master's, and then I did this marketing qualification alongside, because that was from Chartered Institute Marketing, which is a professional qualification, which actually was really valuable, because that showed you more about applications. So rather than theory, it was really more about application. So I did all that, and then you enter the workforce and you think, okay, well, that's a lot of time. I was 23 or something, and a lot of time and effort been put into building, Russell and who he should be at that stage. Then you come into a business and you think, well, I should have an immediate impact. I should be, this badge should sit behind me of what I've learned and studied and understood, and now I should go in and be great at what I'm going to do. But the reality is, it doesn't work like that. It takes a long time, and I think, I see it here with iVentiv. We tend to hire quite a lot of young people into roles here. And a lot of the times they come in and they want to go at 100 miles an hour. They want to have an immediate impact. They want to be the top performer in the team straight away. And once you can sort of break that urgency and allow them to say, look, you don't have to straight away. Literally the first few weeks, there's no expectation at all from you. Just understand who we are. And actually, it probably takes longer than that. Really start to understand who we are as a business, start connecting with people across the team, work out who can support you and what you need to do. And then you'll find your way, you'll find your feet, and you'll start, hitting results, and you'll know when the expectation is on you, because we'll be discussing it. But that urgency that people come in with, I think, can be too much of a burden. And we see people come in and within the first few weeks, they're staying up really late working on things. And then they're coming in and saying, oh, I was up till 10, 11, 12 last night working on this. And that's not really what it's about. It's just about, take a bit of time, find your place, find your feet. And actually quite often, and we do this with the business here, if people come in and they're not in the right role, that's fine as well. I think people sometimes feel they have to fit, where they land. And actually, that's not the case. If you're in the wrong place, then, with our view, we've helped people move on to bigger, better roles in many ways, largely because they were better, aligned for them. So I think this pressure that people come in with, I can understand where it comes from, and I felt it exactly the same myself, because I was university, particularly now, costs a lot of money. So you go in with this, I'm worth this much money because I've put all that education in. But then just calm down and take your time, find the network in the business, talk to people around you, and hopefully have somebody above you who's supportive of you taking that time. But yeah, that sense of urgency, I think, is one of the problems. I mean, you need a bit of urgency at some points, but actually, until you know how to do what you need to do, urgency is just going to stress you out.
Yeah, I agree. And this also shows how important it is to not only very carefully select the company you will be working with, but also your team, your boss, whether this is a person who will be supporting you and allowing you this kind of freedom, right? You also mentioned, somebody coming fresh from university. So I've been reading lately a lot about, what's the real challenge of learning organizations, if they really can claim to be a learning organization at all.
Yep.
So their biggest challenge is to identify and to define what needs to be unlearned.
Yeah.
So unlearning is a big keyword. So what has been during the past years, also during the many iVentiv conferences you were part of, what have been those things, perhaps also connected to the pandemic, what had to be unlearned?
Yeah, well, it's funny with the business because you see it year on year. So the events we've run, generally right back to the first event, we're getting global heads of learning from companies with an average of around 100,000 employees. So a very sort of homogenized group in terms of the people in the room, in terms of their seniority and responsibility. And then also, year on year, you can compare and contrast them, although the faces change, the roles and the responsibilities are very similar. And generally what you see is, when I started the business 2008, the first event was called, so they're all learning and development. The first event was called training and development. And at the time, we all felt, well, not all felt, but there was a more of a agreed consensus that training was an important word, and that training, probably sort of simplifying it a bit here, but probably related more to the formal part of people being in a room for training. And that was kind of the view, 2008, 2009, of how things would be done. And I think that financial crisis that we had, back then, instantly put restrictions on travel. And I think that was the first time people realized that actually they didn't have to go and travel to engage in learning. E-learning had been around for long enough, and the basic sort of click through flash-based technology and different things, but the technologies were continually improving. And so I saw that move from literally from year one to year two. We changed the name from training to learning, because there was, at the time, everyone was like, oh, are we calling it training now? We should be talking about learning and looking more organization wide and enterprise wide, and it should be more embedded into the workflow. And you see those changes starting to happen, and also that reticence towards technology that was at the start, because a lot of learning technologies at the start were quite basic, click based, e-learning with flash technology, which I thought was amazing.
Even boring.
It's boring, yeah, exactly. So this was the problem, but it was so cost effective. Like when I worked at an education company up here in Leamington, actually, and just at the cusp of new technology coming in, and we were doing NVQ qualifications. And NVQs, a lot of the assessments that we were doing at the time were multiple choice. So you do your multiple choice exam, hand it in, and then a few months later you'd get a response, which obviously for multiple choice, machine would tell you the answer, your responses straight away. So you then had to wait a few months, and by the time you got the feedback, you didn't know what you'd got wrong. And so the change I saw, this was back in 2005 with that technology, was that actually we could get the result immediately, so that you could see whether you passed or failed. But critically, even if you got 80%, the teacher could then sit with you and say, okay, well, these are the ones you got wrong, and you could reflect on, so there's a huge learning experience and reinforcement experience of that person who'd got 80% right. This is right, you got it right. So that seemed like a big change. So I think in terms of unlearning, I think those views of technology have really, over the years evolved and I've seen over LMS systems as well, and into learning experience platforms and different things, that people have always changed, continually year on year changed their view about how technology could play a role in learning. And now it's absolutely the heartbeat of how we deliver learning, the move from training to learning, as I mentioned. And then obviously for my business, I always felt that it was very rich in-person experience. That was the high value of iVentiv. You had to come together and be in that room, and it was about meeting people and having that connection. And then we had to run virtually, so that wasn't sort of a conscious I want to unlearn this. It was that we had to do it. And actually, we've realized now that for a lot of our markets, a lot of our sort of subsectors and everything, virtual is way better. Like it makes more sense for a small focus, few hours on a sector specific group of heads of learning. We can go into, we ran a banking event the other week. We can go into this very, specific niche focus and bring people together from all different markets. Carbon footprint is massively reduced and everyone can be there for those few hours, So I think we're continually unlearning. I think it's a really essential thing for us to do. And I think everybody, entering the workforce now needs that lifelong learning mindset and, a growth mindset. And I think everybody over the past year and a half has had to have that. I think literally everybody's role has changed. And I think a lot of the things we felt we couldn't do, a lot of managers who felt they couldn't, manage or lead remotely have managed to do it and done exceptionally well at it. So it's something we're all continually going to be doing. And with the pace of technological change, probably even more so. So yeah, unlearning is definitely definitely important part for a growth mindset, I would say.
Yeah, I fully confirm, by the way, because I had the pleasure to be part of one of these virtual meetings as a client, and it was, very effective to have a one-to-one during 10 minutes, with a CLO, and this person could be much more focused in the conversation with me than in a person-to-person environment. Yeah. So that was a very surprising observation for me, at least. Talking about, now pretty pandemic specific, consequence, not only, but it's, when I now look back at the type of meetings I'm having since a few years now, it's very well structured, a lot of items, the agenda is, very clear and tight very often as well. So I'm wondering, how young professionals can make them heard and speak up in these, very tight agendas. And I remember one observation you shared with me before is that in one of your sessions, it was, I think, a hackathon, and it went a little bit, in an unusual way because the young professionals were present. So what was so unusual because they were present?
Yeah, I think one of the things with, iVentiv, although obviously very proud of how we built the business and what we do, I think one of the challenges we probably could, level at ourselves is that by having such a sort of closed group in that room, such an experienced group, the global heads of learning, and it's, a small enough group of them, but it's almost a self-confirming group because their sort of mindset is probably similar and some of the experience they've had are similar. So it's one of the things we challenged ourselves with is, can we bring in, people with very different views or, sort of challenger groups into this room to try and give different perspectives. So, and that's actually virtually, that's even easier because you can just ask people, can you jump on, we run some events on different sectors, we run on procurement and different things. So we get our learning leaders come to that, maybe someone from procurement to learning. So we can rotate them around a little bit. But a few years ago, we had, a session in London and we decided to bring in, I didn't really like the term millennials, but anyway, we termed it, millennials. We brought in a group of people who basically were entering the workforce, so sort of new entrants to the workplace. And we ran, HR hackathons. We didn't have all the computers out to build software, but it was a HR interpretation of a hackathon. So we had our HR leaders in the room, and then we had a group. I think it was about 6 of this sort of millennial group come in from. Generally, the group, because we went through university, so we found people who generally just finished their first sort of undergraduate degree and were about to enter the workforce. One of them started a business already. A couple had got internships sorted and different things. So they came in and were our sort of user group. So we had a conversation with them and we decided what we would do is split the heads of learning, heads of talent it was for that event, into subgroups, and they would have to go off and build sort of an onboarding platform or an onboarding program for this new intake to join an organization and help them sort of, in the first few months find their feet. So when we had this conversation, we then set a sort of topic for each of the heads of talent groups, and they went off and started building these, and then we had a midpoint where they could come back and sort of share back what they were building. And it was just quite interesting seeing, well, first of all, how this user group were confident enough to really challenge back. So for me, I particularly from starting the business, I was always looked up to these global heads of talent in my large organizations, and this millennial group were very happy to challenge back and say, that's not a good idea. Why would you be doing that? It doesn't work. And I think that I mean, a lot of organizations do reverse mentoring and different things now, and I think that open exchange and the way we'd managed to set them so they felt they could challenge back worked really well. And then they went back and reiterated, and when they presented back the next time, they'd aligned much better on that user group. And I think the sort of takeaway for me from that was these ideas of hierarchies have been flattening, even the time I've been in the workplace. I think I remember Charles Jennings sharing at the events, and I think it was John Husband actually who talked about hierarchies, this idea that of how structures of organizations are now really set up, and particularly over the past sort of 18 months, I think hierarchies is the right term. But that's the reality now, that the new intake into organizations probably don't need to feel they're sitting right at the bottom of this. They can come in and be the challengers. They can bring a lot of ideas and change and influence the way the organization is going, because essentially, they're going to be running it. It's going to be their business in the future. So it was really interesting, to see that exchange, how confident they could be, and how, I suppose, empowered they were when they were confident in that space and encouraged to be that way, which probably means you need leaders and managers who in your business are encouraging you to be yourself, to be confident and to come forward. And probably in the world we're in right now, probably is a little bit of a challenge. But as said when we spoke briefly earlier, I think this hierarchy idea actually does flatten things out a lot more. So this idea that you want to build your network and start to connect with people, you probably can do that as effectively now, even remotely, or even if you're in the office, still using technology and connecting with anyone in the business, and suddenly start to build those networks yourself. So it's definitely certainly a different time in space right now in terms of where we are with technology and how people embed into organizations. But I think having that confidence, and coming into organizations and sharing who you are, what you view, and getting that feedback, those feedback loops, and reverse mentoring and different things, I think it's quite an exciting time to join.
Russell, thank you very much. I mean, for all these insights, also for your insights into some of your own personal early career experiences. It was a real pleasure meeting you today and talking with you. I wish you all the best for you personally, and also for your very courageous and innovative iVentiv team, and hope to see you very soon.
Thank you for your time, Paco. Lovely to talk to you as always. I'll speak to you again soon.
Thank you very much, Russell. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.